Morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us for the Medical Board of California Quarterly Board Meeting Day 2. While this meeting is being conducted with participating board members and staff at the Sacramento meeting location, this meeting is being streamed interactively using WebEx to allow for remote public comment in the same manner as recent meetings. Public comments for those who wish to speak will be heard for each agenda item, from individuals attending in person and remotely. To be ready for remote public comment, we ask that you please ensure your comments can be heard clearly by being connected to the audio of this meeting through the proper method. If you are having difficulty hearing the audio of this meeting, it could be because the device you are connecting with has bandwidth limitations. If you do have difficulty hearing the audio of this meeting using your device, please click the ellipsis button at the bottom of the WebEx application or the audio and video menu item at the top of the WebEx application and then select Switch Audio. You will see an option to call in and will be provided with a telephone number, access code, and attendee ID that can be used to connect to the meeting audio via phone. Using the information provided, it will disconnect your device's audio and connect your phone to the name you joined the meeting with. By using this method, if you're having audio problems with your device, this will still allow you to participate and hear the audio of the board meeting. Please see View Additional Meeting Information link on the first page of the meeting agenda for more information on connecting to the meeting and accessing the meeting materials. Thank you, President Lawson. You can now start the meeting.
Great. Thank you, Sean. And welcome to day 2 of the August quarterly board meetings of the Medical Board of California. I would like to ask all of the members to please turn our mobile devices to silent. For those of you in the public, you may notice board members accessing their laptops, phones, or other devices during the meeting. They are using these devices to access board meeting materials that are in electronic format. This is an official business meeting of the Medical Board of California, and disruptions of the board's business will not be tolerated. Government Code Section 11126.5 allows a board to remove people who willfully interrupt a meeting and to clear the room if order cannot be restored by removing or muting the disruptive people. The board welcomes public comments on any item on the agenda, and it is the board's intent to ask for public comments prior to the board taking action on any agenda item. If for some reason I forget to ask you for public comment on an agenda item and you'd wish to speak on that item, please raise your hand or come forward and you will be recognized. As Sean noted, this meeting is also being streamed via WebEx. Individuals attending the meeting remotely via WebEx will have an opportunity to provide public comment and will be assisted by the host who will be facilitating the WebEx meeting. During each agenda item, the host moderating this WebEx event will activate the hand raising and Q&A features of WebEx and will ask anyone wishing to make a public comment to indicate so by raising their hand or entering yes in the Q&A window. The host will then call on individuals who indicated they wish to make public comments by the name provided. That name may be a pseudonym. When called upon, the host will unmute the microphone of the individual and they will have 3 minutes to make their public comment, but this time period may be reduced depending on the number of people who wish to speak so that more people may be heard. The host will audibly announce when 30 seconds remain to conclude the public comment. After the individual's time for public comment has lapsed, the individual will be placed back on mute. Only one public comment per agenda item is allowed per attendee. I would like to remind all speakers to please stay on topic and keep your comments to the allotted time or less. Today's meeting will be run according to the Open Meeting Act as required by law, and we do plan to end today by 2 p.m. I'd like to officially call this meeting of the Medical Board of California to order at 9:04 a.m. Ms. Struther, please call the roll.
Dr. Ayala Rodriguez.
Here.
Dr. Bolat.
Here.
Ms. Chung. Dr. Helzer.
Here.
Ms. Mitchell. Dr. Mahmood. Dr. Thorpe.
Here.
Ms. Torres.
Here.
Dr. Sai.
Here.
Mr. Watkins. Dr. Yip. Ms. Lawson.
Here. All right, we are going to move right along to the main event today, which is agenda item 13, a presentation on navigating the AI frontier, regulatory challenges and opportunities for state licensing boards. I am really excited and pleased to introduce our speaker, Frank Myers. Mr. Myers is the Deputy Legal Counsel from the Federation of State Medical Boards. He specializes in healthcare regulation and professional licensing, with a particular focus on the use of artificial intelligence, AI, in these fields. Mr. Myers has been actively involved in the discussions and panels on artificial intelligence, most notably moderating a panel at FSMB's AI Symposium in Washington, D.C., which was held this past January. This event brought together leading minds in the field to discuss the implications and future of AI in healthcare and law. Additional details may be found in Mr. Myers' bio, which was included in your board materials. We very much appreciate you joining us today to discuss AI in the context of licensing board. Welcome, Mr. Myers.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I'm trying to turn my video off, but it seems to be acting a little weird. So let me try something else real quick. I apologize. We literally just tested this and it worked out fine.
We just watched you test it, so we know it can work.
Oh, I see what the problem is. My apologies. 1 second. Okay. I got fancy and I tried to use AI on my camera and it didn't want to work. There we go. Okay. And then let me share my screen. Screen 1. Okay. Is that small or is it wide? I know working with Sean every once in a while would come up
That's
looking
the small side.
weird.
Mr. Myers, if you
All
could.
right. Yeah, let's swap to this. How about that?
Perfect.
Perfect. Okay. So good morning, everyone. Thank you for inviting me today to present to you on artificial intelligence. There are a lot of slides in here, so I'm going to try and go through these. If you have questions, I'm happy to answer them as we go along. I know a lot of this is kind of maybe new, maybe complicated. Otherwise, I'm happy to answer all those questions at the very end. So really, I'm here to inform and engage with all of you, and provide you with the information that you need and you're interested in as regulators. So feel free to stop me at any time. So before we get into the presentation, a couple disclosures. As an attorney, I feel like I always have to do these, but this presentation is for informational purposes only and is not intended to provide legal or medical advice. The views and opinions that are expressed in this presentation are those of myself, the presenter, and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of any organization. I will reference a few policies and positions, specifically the Federation of State Medical Boards policy on AI, but I would encourage all of you to read the official policies and positions and get their official viewpoints as opposed to whatever viewpoints I may offer here. Always better to go for the source. And then portions of this presentation, including the generation of images, quite honestly, mostly the generation of images, were assisted by the use of AI. And that the use of AI in the creation of this presentation does not imply an endorsement or validation of the content by AI or its creators. And that's specifically referencing a couple of examples that I'm going to give as we go through this of other AI models and outputs. And those outputs are just simply there to be an example. I'm not endorsing or criticizing those or validating those outputs in any real way. A little bit about FSMB, the Federation. At the Federation of State Medical Boards, we proudly support state medical boards within the United States, its territories, and the District of Columbia. We serve our member boards as they fulfill their mandate of protecting the public's health, safety, and welfare through proper medical regulation, licensing, and disciplining of physicians, physician assistants, or otherwise known as physician associates, and other healthcare professionals. Our top priority at FSMB is supporting our state medical boards in their critical mission of public protection. And our support is quite vast and diverse. It includes areas of advocacy, policy and communications, technology and information services, educational programming, assessment services, and licensing and disciplinary data. So a little bit about myself. You've heard my bio. I have about a little over 10 years experience in the professional licensure field, especially healthcare. I started out with the state of Missouri as general counsel, worked up and ran the entire licensing, oversaw all of the licensing boards in the District of Columbia, and now I am the deputy legal counsel for the Federation. But my interest in AI comes from my initial background actually in college, where my minor was computer science. I quickly realized math was not my specialty, so I switched to history. But I've always had an interest in technology and science and computers. And so when this area kind of exploded a while back with the introduction of ChatGPT, I found this to be a fascinating area and just kind of took up the lead. And during that time, I've realized I've learned a lot. And I do believe strongly that regulators and licensees need to be educated about AI in order to properly care for their patients and also to ensure public protection. But we don't need to be data scientists or computer engineers or anything like that. We just need to know enough, both regulators and licensees need to know enough about what the capabilities of these tools are to ensure that the services and that they are providing and that boards are providing are quality. So what are we going to learn about today? So we're going to four major areas. We're gonna define AI. We're going to talk about the uses of AI that exist. We're going to talk about regulating AI and how that may come about and what is the current state of regulation. And then we're going to talk a little bit about the future of AI. And with the future, we're going to talk about some technologies that exist but aren't yet out there, that aren't yet fully implemented, but that are clearly showing indications of how they want to or intend to tr- transform certain areas of our society. So let's start with defining AI. Depending on who you ask, you're going to get a lot of different responses to what is AI. I'm going to show you a couple images here that were created by AI itself using the following prompt: a group of scientists and regulators trying to define the term AI. And so let me get this little window out of the way. And so these are just three different images. I'm not quite sure what the AI was trying to get at. Clearly, some interesting images of robots and the brain and things like that. But this is just an example of those image generation models that are out there, and how even AI itself views three different images. You get three different, or three different inputs, you get three different images. Sorry, the same input three times, you get three different images. Normally at this point, I do a poll of our audience, but since I'm not there, I will go ahead and skip that. But generally, I like to ask at this point, how many people have used ChatGPT and how often they are using it? Because I'm always curious and it helps kind of inform, my position and what I'm looking at. But really, there is no wrong answer. It's a new technology. It's something we're all learning. It's being integrated in many ways. And so whether or not you use it, I do think it's extremely important that you become aware of how it's being used, because while you may not use it, I am almost certain that all of you have probably at some point consumed material, summaries, agendas, letters, anything like that, even images, as you're seeing right now, potentially even audio, that was AI generated. So when we talk about AI, we really do mean a lot of things. You've heard of it as artificial intelligence, augmented intelligence. Most recently, Apple is trying to call it Apple intelligence. But it's generally, covers machine learning, generative AI, natural language processing. You've probably heard of large language models, the terms multimodal, fine tuning, digital twins and agents, which is kind of a rising area of AI use. These are all things that when we say we refer to AI, these are included in that. But what we really, really mean when we say AI is we're referring to an umbrella term for really any technology that can perform, quote, intelligent tasks. And for decades, most AI has been used for analysis, data analysis, trolling large sets of data. But with the current generative AI boom, we're seeing AI begin to do much more human-like behaviors. And this is done through pattern matching to create words, images, sounds, and it's opened up a whole new possibilities of things that we just didn't think were possible before. But AI is not new. AI has been around for some time. So why all of a sudden is AI become so popular or so concerning to the public and to regulators as yourself? Well, the answer to that goes back to 2017 when Google published a paper called "Attention is All You Need." And you may not be able to see, the names or the type font up there too well, but a lot of these authors have left Google and now work for larger other companies, OpenAI, Anthropic, and others. But this paper really transformed, no pun intended, the entire AI field by introducing a new methodology called transformers. So on the left, you see a link to the article that was published, the research paper that was published by Google. And on the right, you see an image from an article by the Washington Post. And it was a really great article, I think, that kind of demonstrated why AI has gotten so good and so fast. And then here they use the example of images and how those images have gotten better between 2016 to 2022 and 2023. And so you can see just in those few short period of years how much better those images have gotten. But again, what about transformers changed everything? Why all of a sudden is it now popular? Well, these are two images, again, great diagrams from the Washington Post. But these diagrams really show the prior state of the art and the current state of the art, which Transformers technology has brought about. So on the left, you see kind of our old AI models. They would analyze words sequentially. So we're using here this hypothetical of the sentence, the cat went to the litter box. And the model would learn each word in the sequence, but as the words got longer and as you began to add sentences, paragraphs, essays, the models would forget what the original sentence was, so as you got to the end, the cat went to the litter box, and as you got to the box, it would begin to forget what we were even talking about, the cat. It couldn't make the connections necessarily as well as it was needed to be. But the Transformers model processes all of the relationships between words at the same time immediately. And this is a method called attention. So when you see the cat went to the litter box, it's analyzing how each word relates to every other word in that sentence at the exact same time. And so obviously cat and litter, as you can see right there, are closely related. And so the model now understands when you're talking about a cat, the percentage chance of litter can come up higher, or when you're talking about litter, the chance of a cat coming up in that sentence, paragraph, etc., is much higher than it would before. And so what the model is actually doing is no longer memorizing a sequence of words, but it's beginning to understand a pattern. It's beginning to understand connections. And so you may have heard, these large language models as just really, really fancy predictive autocompletes. And that is a very simplistic way, quite honestly, of describing these, because to get the best autocomplete answer requires you understand the concept and the content that is being given to you and being described. So there's a lot of debate that you see out there and a lot of articles talking about what these models, how, quote, intelligent are they? Because at the end of the day, it truly is, despite understanding the relations to each other, it is all just math. I will not dive deep into this slide, but this is a really great tool called Transformer Explainer on the left. If you are interested in learning a lot more about the data elements and the building and the structure of how these large language models work, this is a very interesting, it's a fun little tool. This literally is a very fancy autocomplete in which you can give it a sentence. And in this example, it was the sentence of data visualization empowers users to, and then ask the model to fill in the last word. And here the model chose to fill in the word create. And you could see all of the work that went through that to generate what that word was. And you'll also notice here that in the example, if you could see it very well, that create wasn't the top line probability. The top line probability was visualize at 23%. So, and that's where the models then begin to call, and I won't go into the huge details because that's a whole other conversation, but what we call temperature. Setting the temperature high or low, allowing for a different level of randomness in the responses. Because if you always pick the top line percentage, your gut reaction is that's always right, but the reality is it's not. There's a level of statistical probability in even choosing the right answer. So that is a very, very in-depth, very detailed analysis. If you want something, though, a little more digestible, a little bit more entertaining, there's a great book here on the right by Janelle Shane. I will recommend this book for reading if you want to know more about artificial intelligence. She really puts it into a very digestible way. She was a researcher. The title of the book even comes from, it's quite hilarious, it comes from a program that she tried to build to create an AI to generate pickup lines. The author was on a dating website and was just getting terrible pickup lines, and she's like, how bad can these be? And eventually the bot came out with one she liked, which was just, you look like a thing and I love you. And so that's what led to the title of that book. And it's a very entertaining read, and one I highly recommend if you really want to learn more about what these models are, what they're capable of, and how they work. But in the end, really, it all comes down to data. As you can see from the graph, the more data, there's a lot of data going input into it, being reviewed, analyzed, and the more data you have, the more accurate data and output you can give, because it can give you a better understanding of the world and create a better image of the world. The last thing I'm going to say about large language models, but perhaps the most important, is the role of foundational models in the process. I'm sure at this point, most of us have heard about ChatGPT. We probably have heard about Claude, maybe about Llama or Gemini, or the large language models that are out there. There are massive expenses in creating those foundational models. They're estimating now that it'll be approximately $1 billion to create the next generation of models that are being trained. But it is much less expensive, although still costly, to just fine tune the larger models on more specific data sets. And so the idea here is that if you want to, probably something you shouldn't do, but anthropomorphize these things, is treat it like sending a kid off to college. You're going to send them to college to learn all the basics, to learn the understanding of the world. And then once you've got that, 4 years of training, you're going to send them off to finer training, finer education, a more focused education to say learn law or to learn healthcare. And so I used a person, but really a great example is a good canine citizen trying to train a dog. The foundational commands of sit, come, down, and stay. But what if you wanted to create a police dog or a special service dog or a guide dog, hunting dog, etc.? Well, you're going to take those initial trainings, you're going to layer on top some special trainings, and that's going to give them a bigger focus on those things, the police dog being a guide dog, being a hunting dog. And so these same principles equally apply to professions and are being used as such by Google. These slides, every one of these slides I just showed you is actually from Google itself. It's from one of their educational platforms talking about AI. And you can see right here, they believe that with health, they could take healthcare data from millions of EHRs, use those to create reusable components to build their own medical foundational model, a model that understands all of medicine, and then kind of focus it and do some fine tuning towards task adoption. So that'd be things like answer questioning, question answering, sorry, chart summarizing, doing some image analysis and labeling, so from MRIs, X-rays, or other scans, and then ultimately doing some type of risk stratification that can be done either through maybe some differential diagnosis or other things, or finding similar patients. And the risk stratification, I should actually say, is more used for clinical studies and trying to find those best patients. And then lastly, adding in human AI collaboration to really create and implement a lot of this to make the best output possible for healthcare. At least that is the proposal, and that is the argument that is being made by these large corporations, Google and others, that are working on these fields, that are working on these programs. So I mentioned that AI, there's a lot of data involved in AI. There's a lot of work in AI. Despite its capabilities and despite everything that has been promised about how AI can replace humans and really cut costs and help expedite processes, getting to that point is a lot of work. This is an article from a website called The Verge, and it's talking about this kind of vast tasker, we'll call them task completion, task worker underclass that is emerging, to really go through and see where the data is coming from, verify the data, and then clean up the data. There are companies out there like Scale AI that employ tons and tons and tons of employees that all they do, they're called annotators, and all they do is label data or images or anything that comes in, whether that be text or images. It could be clothing, it could be social media posts, it could be emotions in customer service calls. Like this caller was clearly upset, and so this audio is from an upset caller. And so that audio is then annotated and then used with training those algorithms. And these tasks are very complicated. It's very laborious. They pay very terribly, especially in like many third world countries where maybe you make $1 to $3 an hour. In countries like Kenya, while in the United States, there are some companies out there that may offer $10 to $25 an hour. A lot of the work you can do from home, very boring, very mundane. But there are tons and tons of companies out there. And quite honestly, this technology and its prevalence, I just don't see any of this going away. So don't forget that there's a lot of data that goes into making a good quality model. And one of the things to be aware of is that when people are promising models, as a regulator or as a user actually of these models, a question you should be asking yourself is, what data was used to create this model? What school did it go to, if you will, to learn those things? So data, again, is extremely important. So I'm going to go ahead and skip now to the uses of AI and how AI is really being used. And the focus of this is primarily on healthcare. There's obviously many other areas that AI is being used, but we're going to focus today on its use in healthcare systems. And we're going to start off with a model that maybe, or a product that some of you may or may not be aware of, called MedLM or MedPalm. MedPalm is from Google. It is a medical large language model based on, at this point, I guess, an older model called Palm. And so they, just added the med to the front of that. And it was last updated in 2023. So it was created in 2022. A year later, in 23, it was updated and became MedPalm 2. That highlights a lot of the problems with these models is how quickly they evolve, get updated, new materials. And so trying to understand from people or trying to make people understand which model to use and which models are the current state of the art has led to a lot of naming nomenclature confusion. And so really what you end up having is that Google has kind of consolidated all of its large language models, especially with the medical focus, under this larger banner of MedLM. And MedLM really currently includes two major models built on MedPalm 2. And ideally, I would imagine it as future iterations and inventions come out, they'll all be kind of go into that MedLM banner. But Google is not doing this in a vacuum. It's not purely theoretical or research. They are partnering with a lot of partners. One of the tools from Google is a program called Augmetics, which is very similar, and I'll go through it a little bit detail later about these AI scribes. But HCA Healthcare is piloting with Google in using Augmetics solution and using MedLM to help physicians create accurate and timely medical notes. BenchSci is a company that's integrating MedLM into its Ascend platform, which is to improve the speed and quality of preclinical drug research and development. So really trying to help identify best patients and trying to determine maybe who would better react versus others or who wouldn't react versus others. And then Google is working with Accenture to help healthcare organizations use generative AI to improve patient access, experience, and outcomes. Think of that as kind of like an integrated chatbot that can talk with the patient and answer questions about general care, maybe not clinical questions, but who's the doctor, who's my doctor, who should I speak to about this thing, that thing. And I'll give an example of a chatbot used by regulators a little bit later in this presentation. And then lastly, companies like Deloitte and Google Cloud are exploring really how generative AI can help improve the member experience. This would be something that would be a little bit more chatbot, but care provided kind of thing, and improve the member experience and reduce friction in finding care through that interactive chatbot. So asking maybe some basic intake questions and building upon that. So those are just some ideas of how Google has been working on implementing those systems. And no doubt that what we know about publicly is not entirely what is being implemented and developed. Another partner out there I didn't mention, Mayo Clinic, has been working a lot with Google on these things. So I mentioned MedPalm 1 in 2022, and then MedPalm 3 came out in 2023. And what you see here, these are charts from Google, and then you can see on the very first chart, MedPalm got about a 67% approximate medical pass mark. And a year later, MedPalm 2 got an 85% medical pass mark. And you can see there on both charts, the approximate medical pass mark is 60%. And you can see there in the gray, those are several other large language models that are focused on healthcare, GPT-Neo, PubMed, BERT. I just got notification today of a new model, Meditron, that is an interesting thing to play. But one thing I would ask you all to take away from this slide, which is from Google itself, is what does this mean? What is even an approximate medical pass mark? What does it mean for MedPalm to get MedPalm 2 to get 85 versus MedPalm 67? What are these benchmarks that are being used? According to Google, these are essentially the same as passing the medical exam, the USMLE. Now, I could say Google did not take the USMLE. We at the Federation, we are one of the co-sponsors, co-owners of the USMLE, and so we can very, very confidently tell you that Google has not taken that exam. What Google has done is use a publicly available data set called the MedQA data set, which is comprised of medical licensing exam style questions and created its own data set, its own exam for these models to take. And on this exam that it gave, it determined that a 60% was an average benchmark, and that it models did 67 and now 85%. And so two lessons I really ask people to take away from this visual right here. One, benchmarks. I will say benchmarks are a big problem. Everybody has them. Everybody gives these grandiose statements. And when I say everybody, I mean these developers and these creators of these models about what they're capable of. But benchmarks are general. And these large language models are getting applied to situations that aren't necessarily general. I mean, sometimes they are, but a lot of times, especially in healthcare, they're being applied to a very specific medical use case. And so how accurate is it, say, on some sort of diagnostic imaging versus maybe a verbal consultation or things like that? Your benchmarks may differ. And especially when those benchmarks are based on a test that the creator themselves have created. So that's the first thing is benchmarks. Always be aware of which benchmarks are being used, and I do believe at some point there needs to be an independent benchmark that is verifiable, not from these companies themselves. And the other takeaway is just to be aware of the increase in accuracy in 1 year. Regardless of what benchmark was used, the same benchmark was used between MedPalm 1 and MedPalm 2. And clearly it has improved significantly in the case of 1 year between its initial use and its second use. Doesn't necessarily mean it's ready to go and it's ready to go out and practice, but it does mean that it is definitely improving as time goes on and as more data is absorbed. Here's just a couple other slides really to show you what else Google's doing. Google's in the insurance claims acceleration suite. They're in the insurance industry, helping streamline health insurance prior authorizations. They're also in the medical imaging suite. This really is actually the medical imaging suite was more of a way for Google Cloud to try and really help create an AI assisted annotation. I showed you earlier that image about data and how important annotation is. And so what Google was trying to do with this imaging suite is to create a place and find partners in health systems that could put in these images and then annotate them for digestion and training for their medical imaging models. And so that's kind of what that is. But they're also offering medical imaging, and in turn, they're offering medical imaging to see how well it can do and assist in those processes. I mentioned earlier the Mayo Clinic, Google's medical AI chatbot is already being tested in hospitals. Apparently, Mayo Clinic has already been testing that since April of 2023. This is actually a year old. What its current status is, cannot say. And to what degree it's being implemented in their health system, I cannot say. We at the Federation have been in contact, not with Mayo, but we have been in contact with the AI team at Duke Health. And so we've been trying to get an idea of like, how are these systems actually being used and integrated and studied? You know, I have an idea in my mind and I can visualize it, but I'd like to actually see the workflow because we believe that is extremely important in helping regulators understand the level of responsibility and the role that these tools play with the developers and the patients. My one thing I'll leave on this slide, though, is that, you know, this has been supposedly in tests in the hospital since 2023. And I know healthcare, you know, things take a little bit longer, but I'd like to see the clinical data. You know, it's the same thing for all of these tools, not just Google, but any other clinical AI tool being used. You know, again, goes back to the benchmark statement. We've seen a lot about benchmarks, but where's the data? Where are the studies, the independent studies showing us, you know, the success and the treatment rates and things like that? Seen plenty of data, and I should emphasize this is separate and apart from what I like to call diagnostic AI. You know, there's plenty of medical studies out there about that this AI algorithm helped detect cancer in patients at X percentage. I'm talking about these models that are designed to really act as digital doctors, AI doctors, things like that. So another example of a very popular tool is and one maybe many of you have already experienced either as a patient or as a clinician, are these digital AI scribes. This here is an image from Dragon Ambient Experience from from Nuance. And Nuance has actually been bought by Microsoft. So this is now a Microsoft product. And DAX is Microsoft's version of a product I mentioned earlier called Augmetics. And essentially it is a device. In fact, my personal physician uses this. And you walk into the clinical office and the doctor takes his phone, puts it on the ground or face down, and it listens to the conversation that's going on. It listens to that clinical encounter. And then at the very end of it, the AI generates notes that the doctor reviews and puts into the medical record. And so this is one of those tools that has really taken off and has found a lot of popularity. This is kind of what it's called an AI scribe, but I really like to think of this as an AI transcription tool. In the non-healthcare space, there's a lot of tools out there. There's Otter AI, Nada AI, Microsoft's now integrated that, and a lot of other things. And so there's a lot of tools. This is probably one of the more popular tools. It's also one of the more expensive. It's quite expensive. The licensing fee per clinician per year is quite high. And so this has led to a lot of new companies sprouting up that are trying to offer alternative, cheaper versions. And so that has created an area of a bit of concern from individuals such as myself. And it goes back again to what I mentioned earlier about the benchmarks. Transcription is, and if you played with these transcription tools, they're amazing. They can do great jobs, but you may have noticed they mess up words every once in a while, and they definitely mess up specific terms of art. And so a lot of these companies, my concern is that they're just taking an existing large language transcription model like Whisper, and they're just putting a wrapper on it to make you think it's healthcare focused, and then not doing a whole lot of fine tuning, not adding those special trainings as we showed earlier for the good canine to be really focused on medical knowledge, medical information, medical verbiage, and things like that. So those are the things to think about when these tools come out there. And right now they're purely diagnostic. However, I've been to a few conferences. I'm sorry, not diagnostic. They're purely transcription. They're really just taking what they hear, creating a transcription, and then summarizing that transcription. The little bit of concern is being raised over that summarization feature. How much is that summarization leaving out? What is it summarizing? And then also, there's been some discussions about a few companies experimenting with, that summary, then offering potential follow-ups. And what are the follow-ups based on? A transcription model is not the same as a clinical model, like I mentioned with Google and MedPalm. Those potential differential diagnoses or follow-up options. That's a decision, not a transcription. So those are, again, the things to think about. This is just an example of a hackathon that went on. This is actually quite some time ago, but again shows the desire to apply these large language models to healthcare. This was Claude is an AI model from a company called Anthropic. It's made up, Anthropic was formed by several former OpenAI employees who left OpenAI because they felt it wasn't ethical enough in its processes. And so here was a hackathon. They asked a bunch of developers, we'll give you free access to our tool, play with it, build something. And they built Dr. Claude. And Dr. Claude and Anthropic, and I'm sure the developers there would tell you it was not in any way ready. Who knows how its accuracy, but the idea here was you would talk to the AI doctor, and as you can see here, it would give you a diagnosis: epilepsy 90%, dependence 9%, confusion, Alzheimer's, and then tonic or not tonic. I will defer to the clinicians in the room about what that means. Maybe it's a hallucination, I don't know. But you see here an example of one of the ideas of how people already want or are trying to build these systems to be used in healthcare. Another example is through the custom GPTs from OpenAI. OpenAI has what are called GPTs. These are custom-made large language models. They're all built on that foundational model from OpenAI, but they add a little bit more custom fine-tuning, not really instruction fine-tuning, I should say, not knowledge fine-tuning. An example I'm going to show you here real quick is Dr. Soap Note. And this was a custom model that I found. I was doing a presentation to chiropractors. And I know they use a lot of soap notes, as do other professions in medical notes. And so I found this model, just searched, and I decided to test it out. And so here is a model soap note. I just asked it to write a soap note for a patient with asthma exacerbation, and it gave all of this information. Patient is a 35-year-old female presenting with complaints of increased shortness of breath, wheezing, coughing, etc. The big thing, and this is normally where I would pause and I'd ask you all to tell me what is wrong with this. But for time's sake, and just because I'm not there, I'll go ahead and just answer that for you. If you look at this, and it looks okay, I never gave it a patient. I never gave it a patient's name, gender, never gave it patient vitals. All I asked it was to write a SOAP note. And the model should have asked, okay, sure, I can do that. Give me the patient information. But here in this use case, it did not do that. It created a completely fictitious patient, completely fictitious vital signs, demographic information, everything. And it just put it out there. And so that's just an example of something that is completely, this is an example of what is known as hallucinations. The model was designed and asked to do something. It did it, but it didn't have the information to do it, so it made it up. A lot of the better models out there, the models that come from OpenAI directly, Google and others, they don't they have what we call guardrails built in, behind the scenes systems designed to keep them on track. And so when you start playing with these things that come from third parties that you just don't know who built them or how they operate, this is how you're going to get things like this, which is just a pure hallucination. So that's another thing I stress to regulators is when people talk about using a model, what are they using? What tool are they using? So here are and the importance of the tool that you're using, who made the model, is that these companies are larger companies. The larger companies are governed generally by capitalism, by the market. It doesn't behoove them to create bad products. And so they've all got their governing AI, their blueprints, their AI principles from Google, responsible use guide from Meta AI, a blueprint from the future by Google. These companies are building these models and putting a lot of work to make sure they're viable, but they're still companies, and their interests are financially motivated and in their own self-interest, not in the interest of necessarily public protection. Not saying they're not trying to hurt anybody or anything like that, but a regulator has a very different viewpoint to how these models can be used versus the developers themselves. That led, I mentioned Claude and Anthropic, that led to them taking a slightly different approach to trying to create a constitution of sorts that's trained into the model itself so that it understands its core good principles, if you will, that it won't do those things. But if you know anything about these models, you know that anything that it can be taught could be untaught or taught over, so that you could teach these models to do things you don't want them to do. And moreover, these companies, these are their own principles. Nothing about them is written in stone. At any time, they can change them and they can rewrite them and do whatever they want. And in fact, OpenAI itself did that. OpenAI disbanded their safety team focused on the risk of artificial intelligence causing human extinction. Doesn't mean they've gotten rid of their entire, their entire workforce focused on safety. It's still there, but a lot of it has been downgraded and put to the side. I just got a notification. I think a hand was raised. I don't know if there's a question, but I'm happy to pause and answer.
Don't worry about that, Frank. We keep those for the public comment sections. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. So I will continue on then. And so again, just the main thing from this is that despite what all these companies or anyone tells you about what are the ethical principles, the guidelines, the way, they're all changeable. They can all be changed at any time. And so really, thought has to be given about what is regulation going to look like for these programs, especially in these health professional settings and really in any professional setting out there. And that brings us to regulating AI. And so, I kind of hinted right there why regulation is needed, but I think, the biggest reasons are its impact on society, its risk of bad actors, the lack of understanding of how these models work, and the professional responsibilities of the professionals that use them but don't understand them, the consent and disclosure issues, and then really, how does this affect standards of care? And so those are the things that we're going to kind of touch upon here real quick. And the first thing that reinforced the idea of how much this will impact society is this article. This was an article from, this is from the McKinsey Global Institute, and this is really showing how AI is going to impact our workforce. And the main takeaway here is you can see how AI will impact, those higher educational workforces more than others comparatively. But I think you can clearly see from this diagram that it will affect everyone very, very highly, at least 57%, especially a master's PhD. And so when you have a technology that is going to affect the workforce across the spectrum, the economic, education, demographic spectrums, there's going to be a lot of change, a lot of transformation, some good, some bad, some happy, some some sad. Not meant to not meant to make that rhyme, but I'm glad it did. And so that really brings up the issue then of if this is going to affect everyone, at some point someone will be harmed. And so regulation really is necessary. But what regulation is necessary, and how will that regulation, you know, take form? What shape will it take? The other thing I mentioned is bad actors. Here you have two different models. These are two different programs that are on the internet. One is Dr. Gupta, that's on the left, and you have Dr. McGrath on the right. Dr. Gupta is a medical doctor, or a medical AI, I should say, and Dr. McGrath is a veterinarian AI. And both of these models are designed to take information and provide you with some sort of diagnosis. And on the left, Dr. Gupa, in fact, asks for a lot of core information, a lot of demographic, a lot of demographic information. Also wants to know age, weight, height, symptoms, vitals, temperature, heart rate, everything like that that it then ingests. If you've had a chance to play with Dr. Gupa or Dr. McGrath, you know they are not quality models. Dr. Gupa, I haven't played with it in quite some time, but it would constantly say that it would when you would ask it, are you a doctor? It would say, yes, I'm Dr. So and so, not Dr. Gupa. It would give another doctor's name. It would say it's licensed in multiple states. Its outputs were not correct and they're very erroneous. And so I will say this was a program that came out very early on in the AI cycle, and they both come from Martin Shkreli, who is a former CEO of Turing Pharmaceuticals, who's probably most infamously known for increasing the price of Daraprim from, I think it was like $17 to $750. He also went to jail for securities fraud, which was unrelated to the whole Daraprim fiasco, but for various other securities issues that were related to pharmaceuticals. And he ended up spending about 7 years behind bars. And then when he got out, this is one of his first investments. So that's just to say that this is an area that has been ripe for investment and ripe for quick actors to just put things out there on a hopes of gaining market share, or maybe even more importantly, gathering data. Because here again, this was gathering a lot of patient information. And so I have no idea what kind of HIPAA compliance security protocols were used on the back end. What even model it was using. Was it feeding this data OpenAI? Was it feeding it to its own custom built model? Things like that. So this is a perfect example of something to be concerned about, and how it impacts patient care and safety. There's also those lawyers that, those people that use it that may not know what they're using, or they just uses it and applies it and doesn't really think twice. Lawyers are probably the worst at this right now, or more importantly, I think they're just the most visible, because unlike a lot of other professions, law is an area of adversity. And so you automatically have an opponent that's trying to undermine everything you do. And so, they question whatever you file. And so on the left is an article from the New York Times where a lawyer submitted a brief in a court filing and used AI to help it, used ChatGPT, and he asked it from a source, a citation, and he just copied and pasted, not doing any backup work. And so his argument to the court was, I heard about this new site, which I falsely assumed was like a super search engine. There's a lot of things wrong with that statement. A lot of things wrong with that statement. One, the first and foremost is that as a professional, there's an expectation that you know what you're doing in the field that you're working. And so to go to a super search engine site that you know nothing about and just copying and pasting is I think a really a failure of your professional duties, especially as a lawyer. And so that led to a lot of troubles. And that's not the only lawyer that's had those troubles. There's just been others that I'll highlight a little bit. But also, there's the issue with hallucinations, OpenAI being sued for defamation, about giving false and misleading information. This specific defamation was related to a search that a radio host had done to look up, I guess, I don't know how it came about, but looking up convicted felons in the neighborhood or something like that, and it came up with the radio host name. And the radio host had nothing like that on the record. That was all false. And so that was an example of defamation, but more importantly, an example of hallucinations. There's also the issue with consent and disclosure. This is an article from The Verge about Amazon's if you ever had a chance to go test out their just walk-in service, you go in, you grab something, you walk out, and the idea is that these cameras and AI are watching you and knows what you picked up, and you'll immediately get charged or automatically get charged as you leave the space. This article could come out in response to many other articles that had said that the cameras and AI never really worked. It was just a bunch of people watching and annotating as they go along. And that was half true, half false. Again, I mentioned earlier that how important annotation is to training these models. And that's what this is referring to, is that there were human annotators that would go in, correct mistakes, and help train the models. But this goes to really the overarching larger issue of people not really understanding what is the intent of these models, how are they used, how are they trained, and how are they being operated, and more importantly, are you engaging with AI? What are you engaging with? And so I do think consent and disclosure is very important. I think here, in all fairness to Amazon, I think this was just a misunderstanding on the public's part about how these technologies are developed. Here is a great actual example of a really good technology, Luminetics Core. This is formerly known as IDXDR, but this is the very first FDA-approved autonomous AI diagnostic system. There is no need for a human in the loop. It uses machine learning algorithms to analyze images and make a diagnosis for diabetic retinopathy. Now, obviously, a human is needed to then implement that diagnosis and do a treatment plan and care, but the whole analysis and treatment operation is completely automated, is completely done by this AI model. We also hear some articles from the New York Times, and this is something from the Mayo Clinic about AI tools. On the left, we have an AI tool diagnosing brain tumors on the operating table to lead to faster and more precise diagnoses. And then we've also got AI-assisted colonoscopies have reduced the miss rate by 50%. What happens when you start using AI and your miss rate goes down by 50%? The standard, at what point does the standard of care change? And then lastly, this is an article from a company that's in the dental space, Pearl. They've raised $58 million to help dentists make better diagnosis using AI. And their software helps do that through interpreting x-rays and visualize dental problems more clearly, leading to the CEO claims a 30% boost in patients agreeing to recommended treatments. And the founder has been quoted as saying that he expects the company to become a global standard of care within 3 years. So again, how does AI transform the standard of care? At what point does it maybe become below the standard of care not to use AI models in certain circumstances? So what is regulation? Well, the status of regulation is not so great, especially in the United States. There's been a lot of talk at the federal level. A lot of pieces of legislation are introduced across various areas to address various issues, whether that be data privacy, deep fakes, things like that. But none of them have really picked up or moved. So the United States is really, really lagging behind. The people at the forefront of this is the EU. The EU AI Act is really the only large European federally encompassing piece of legislation. It's hundreds of pages long. It was adopted and unanimously endorsed by all 27 members of the EU. It just finally went into implementation. And while it does address some of the use of those systems and how those systems are used, it's really primarily focused on disclosure, data training requirements, transparency requirements, copyright issues, and things like that. There's still a lot of gaps. Whoops, it just went back. Sorry, apologies. There's still a lot of gaps left to be filled. And a large part of that is quite honestly that the EU AI Act is not new. It was actually in development before the release of OpenAI, ChatGPT, I should say. But it has been something that has been in work on some of the older models. And so I do think there'll be some updates that'll have to go on throughout time as these models become better. But in the United States, at a federal level, we have nothing. In the EU, we do have something. I should say we don't have nothing. We do have the President Biden's executive order. But if any lawyer can tell you an executive order is as only good as, one, the president in office, and two, how much that supports existing legislative authority. And so really a lot of this executive order is focused on how government agencies and administrations are using and incorporating AI. Lastly, actually, I will say this. On the federal level, though, there are various existing federal laws that do allow for the oversight of AI. Probably the largest being the FTC, or sorry, the FDA as it applies to healthcare. FTC, though, through communications, deepfakes. But then the Office of the National Coordinator within the Department of Health and Human Services at the federal level deals a lot with medical record systems, and a lot of these new AI models, at least in health systems, are being integrated into EHRs, and so they do fall under, say, example, products from Epic. They do fall under ONC's purview, so there is some oversight there. But the real strength in AI regulation in the United States is at the state level. This is Utah Senate Bill 149. It aims to protect consumers from AI harms while still encouraging innovation. It does one of the things that it really mandates a lot of disclosures. It's interesting that it differentiates between mandating disclosures for those in healthcare settings and are those in professional settings versus those in non-professional settings. In non-professional settings, if you're asked, you must disclose, but in a professional setting, you always have to be forthcoming. You must automatically disclose that it is an AI tool that the patient is interacting with. It also creates this kind of sequestered space for people to play, a playground, if you will, to play with some of these AI models under regulatory supervision, which then gives them some safe harbors if the models go a little bit wrong. So this is one idea, one model that's being used in Utah to try to approach these issues. Another version that's out there is Colorado Senate Bill 24205, which also has become law. This implements a risk management this requires implementing risk management policies such as the NISC AI risk, requires companies to conduct and maintain impact assessments, notifying consumers when high-risk AI systems are used for consequential decisions, and providing consumers with information on adverse decisions, data correction opportunities, and appeal processes and things like that. And again, most of these are focused on the developers and the deployers of these systems and don't really get into too much about how like health professionals use them or how these systems will be regulated in their completely independent capacity. Think that Luminetics Core, but a more advanced of that, a robot doctor, if you will. And I would be remiss if I did not include California. This is not law, but California Senate Bill 1047 has been making the news a lot lately. It's been introduced by State Senator Scott, and I apologize if I'm butchering the senator's name, Scott Weiner. And so this one is probably a little bit more in-depth than a lot of the other AI bills. It creates a lot of responsibilities on a lot of these larger companies, OpenAI, Anthropic, which are based in California. OpenAI is obviously against this bill. Anthropic came out not necessarily against, but they do believe in some of the need for regulation. But really it places a lot of responsibilities on developers, such as implementing cybersecurity protections, a capability for full complete shutdown. If something goes wrong, somebody needs to be able to pull the plug. Developing, implementing safety protocols, conducting risk assessments, and a lot of other things. And so it'll be interesting to see. There's a lot of talk that this has a very good likelihood of becoming law. I'll be interested to see if that occurs, and then if it does occur, how this will impact the industry at large. But I do think that ultimately, at the end of the day, while these state bills, I believe strongly in the need for regulation in this space, and I do approve of these measures. But federal legislation will be needed. These tools are massive. They're economically huge. They're so expensive. They impact all industries. Some form of federal regulation will be necessary, if only to stop a patchwork of regulation being created that is just untenable. That does not work. Lastly, I'm going to end this section anyway with our own policy here at the Federation of navigating the responsible and ethical incorporation of AI in clinical practice. And I would encourage everyone to read that in depth and detail. And hopefully over the next couple of years, we'll have some follow-up clarification policies and other information. I've also some articles I've been working on. But the key takeaways from this policy are, one, education is critical. You have to know what you're dealing with. Two, physicians remain accountable. It is physicians that are licensed, and it is physicians that are legally allowed to practice medicine. It is only physicians and licensed physicians specifically. And so physicians are the ones that are accountable. They are the ones who are accountable for any harms that are impacted on their patients by the use of these models. Informed consent and data privacy are paramount. Patients should know what it is they're interacting with. Clinicians should proactively address any bias and access issues with these models. You know, all patients should have access to these models, but these models should be based on data that is not biased, or as little bias as possible. Or if there is bias, that you're aware of what that bias is and that you're taking that into consideration when you're making your decisions as a clinician. The policy believes strongly that AI governance has to be anchored in ethics. The technology is far too advanced, it's far too nuanced, it's far too widely applicable to try and get in on every little specific detail from governance on a professionalism side. I'm not talking about development, but I'm talking about the use of AI. The use of AI in professional settings really has to be based in the ethical obligations of the professional. And lastly, collaboration is key. This isn't being made in a vacuum. It isn't being implemented in a vacuum. You know, collaboration is necessary between both the users and the developers of these systems to make sure that what is created and implemented is safe, secure, and accurate, and reliable, consistently reliable. So what is the future of AI? I think I've just hit my time. So normally I would play a video of here about something that I think brings up a really interesting hypothetical. But this is a product from Hume AI. I don't know if you all would like me to play the video. I'm happy to skip it for now.
Yeah, please do.
Okay, so I will go ahead and just play this, and and I will let you listen, and I may stop it short.
I mean, that definitely sounds like a pretty big deal.
Are you able
How
to
did
hear
you
this?
feel about that?
I don't know. I guess it's not that important. I'm fine.
Okay, well, judging by the tone of your voice, you're not coming off as exactly fine. Are you sure you don't want to talk about it? I'm always happy to listen and lend an ear.
Okay, sure. You know what? Let's get into it.
So I'll end that video there. My main thing I want to take there we go. So my main takeaway from that video, and I'd be love to know the group's thoughts about that as well. But to me, you know, so what that was in a large language model designed to infer emotion from a person's voice. It's from a company called Hume. I apologize as I go through this. It's from a company called Hume, and right now it's not as far as I'm aware. I don't know how many medical settings that it's in, but the idea is to be able to detect a voice. You can see there from the visual, you know, sympathy, coldness, calmness, satisfaction, and then respond accordingly. To me, as a regulator, as a lawyer specifically, you know, there's a level of decision making that occurred there. The AI model said you do not sound well. Are you sure? And like there's even that follow up. So at what point does that then skew into the practice of medicine? And again, I'm not talking about the efficacy or its accuracy or how good or bad it is, but just from the act, let's say that it was accurate. Is there not a level of decision that is being made from a professional, from a provider by the AI that someone is not well? And then specifically, someone is not well in an emotional state. So those are things to think about with a lot of these tools that are, quite honestly, they're just being thrown out there to see how accurate they are. And I don't think there's a lot of consideration of what impact that they will have, other than they will have a huge impact. Here's a series of models that are focused on imaging, specifically in pathology. This is Nucleo AI and enables pathologists to create diverse data sets and models for their own clinical applications. But here's a really interesting one. This is a Path Chat, and this is more like a ChatGPT where you can upload a pathology slide, pathology images, and have a discussion with it. And here it's a discussion about some images, it looks like of the tongue, and it shows normal squamous mucosa and things like that. And the advancements in the imaging models, I think, are probably the most promising and the most interesting from a regulator and a healthcare perspective of how that is going to transform the future of healthcare. And so I will skip through. These last couple slides are really just to show some tools that boards could use. These were created by myself. One's a complaint intake assistance. It's an article that I've been working on, how AI can help medical boards intake complaints from the public and triage those, identify those that are priority, non-priority, what are the follow-up steps for investigation, and also what maybe are the applicable statutes or what statutes may apply in this scenario. And the last one is a more common one. You may have seen chatbots that are they take all of your policies and they're a way to answer questions and answers about those policies with the public. This is an example of one of the hypotheticals from the AI that complaint intake assistant. And then this was the sample output. It determined the jurisdiction, identified the relevant parties, summarizes the complaint. The initial findings from this study, which was done, or from this paper, which was done by myself and 2 other attorneys in the healthcare field, in the board field. The bot's very good at summarizing. It's very good at identifying parties. It's not so great and it's very good at identifying jurisdictions. It's not so great at identifying applicable statutes. And I think that's in large part due to the nature of how statutes are written and constructed. And so we have some ideas on how to improve that, and we're hoping to do a second paper, but we got to get this first one done first. And then, so I will go ahead. This is the DC Health Virtual Agent, which is from the District of Columbia Department of Health. This is how they have implemented AI. It's basically a way for the public to chat, get information about specific staff members and who to contact, things like that. And that is the totality of my slides. And I'm happy to answer any questions that the group may have.
Mr. Myers, thank you for that really interesting and important presentation on AI. I think that, well, just speaking on behalf of myself, I think AI just presents this incredible opportunity to improve healthcare outcomes over the longer term as they work to get these models right. And I think it's going to present some real complexity for us as the medical board, frankly, for all boards, bureaus, commissions that regulate licensed professionals, because in some sense, these tools will be replacing some of the work or enhancing some of the work of the professionals. So, and the point you were making, I guess towards the end of the presentation about, is this model actually practicing medicine? And I'm a lawyer. We have the same question in the legal profession, right? Is the model actually practicing law? Or when does it get to that point? I mean, I think it's just a fascinating and interesting question. And I mean, that being said, one thing I want to make sure over well, I guess both the short term, because these bills have been working their way through the legislature, is that we not be so prescriptive or so afraid of these technologies that we actually focus more on how do we regulate or how do we, thinking about this in terms of what is the practice of medicine versus the opportunity to improve the healthcare outcomes, because that one you had about the colonoscopies up there that said the miss rate was reduced by 50%, I think, and that's really incredible, right? And that's going to lead to some really great healthcare outcomes. So are there any questions, comments from board members about the presentation? We'll go to Dr. Balat and then Dr. Helzer.
Yeah, thank you. It's really a fascinating presentation that you provided us. And obviously there'll be generational differences for the physicians that are practicing, correct? And then I think I had asked wanting to have someone such as yourself coming to bringing this information to the board, because I kind of said, whose note is this anyway? And so, you talked about the SOAP note without any inputs. They made it up. It's a 37-year-old female, no gender, and then started going through this. And I think the concern I have, and I'm in a pretty large health system that is very advanced in its work in collaboration with the Googles of the world. And people start finding ways to be more efficient and more effective. But to your point, the responsibility of understanding the tool that you're using is really going to be very challenging. I think that set of tools, and I really appreciate FSMB for leading that effort for all of the medical boards, but really bringing that home, because right now there are doctors that are using ChatGPT and sending things out and not disclosing that information. So then one of the areas that we have with most of our cases that we see is 90% at least, I might be wrong, but I think most of them have medical record documentation issues. Now, just because you get better at medical record documentation, I get concerned about a two-tiered system, at least a two-tiered system of medical treatment, and services. If I'm in a big healthcare organization that can afford these things, I may be better at documentation than someone that's in a rural community. So there's just so many things, but I think to the point that our board president just made, we don't want to, stop innovation, but it's going to be that nexus of the innovation and the understanding and the responsibility. And that, I think, is going to be a challenge. It's a great challenge to have, but speaking of that colonoscopy as was stated, I mean, and the pathology, we see people making errors on slides. We see people making errors in missing tumors, right? Oh, I didn't catch that one at 15 centimeters. And, the patient comes back and they have a full blown big tumor in their colon somewhere. So I think there's a lot, but I think what would be helpful would be to really break this down into almost what lane is it that the doctor is working in? Am I working in my documentation lane? Am I in a lab doing the path, am I doing these things and getting that information out there? And I think the disclosure to patients from a advocacy of the people that are going to have these, they really do need to know that and not be afraid of it as well. So I think that all that disclosure at the health system levels are going to be important, but really appreciated your presentation very much. Thank you.
Thanks, Dr. Bullock. Dr. Helzer?
Thank you. Mr. Myers, thanks for your very informative presentation. Just a comment, we're also seeing a lot of use of AI models in the hospital setting. And I'm thinking of advanced alert monitoring tools that look at data from the electronic medical record and predict which patients will be transferred to a higher level of care, or patients will get worse in the next 6 to 12 hours. Those models will only get better. We're already seeing decreased numbers of code blues in the hospital as a result. It's just something for us to keep an eye on in the future. Thank you.
Thanks, Dr. Helzer.
No, that's a great point.
And then I see you over here too. So Dr. Thorpe first.
Thank you, Madam President, and thanks for your excellent presentation. I think it does highlight the persistent need for human interaction in this process. What I see is the use of these tools like Augmetics, DAX, and they're for good reason being adopted. But what I don't see, or what concerns me, is that I supervise a number of advanced practice providers, and so I look over their notes a lot. And what happens is they don't edit. They don't look at them to edit, and I think it's probably also true that many physicians don't do that either, because they have nonsense that is in their notes that just doesn't make any sense. And so what's happened is they've stopped using it because initially it was sold as, well, this is going to improve your productivity, but what happens is that it records all the conversation like DAX, records everything that happens in the note, and it edits it out sort of artificially. But if you don't go back and review it and make sure that it's actually accurate, if you don't read your note and edit it, then it doesn't make any, it sometimes doesn't make any sense. So it actually isn't as efficient as you would like, because it actually creates more work, because you have to go back and really carefully look at the note and review it carefully. It does provide it as a template, so you can edit based on that, what it's put together. But a lot of times the assessment and the recommended plan are also inappropriate. And it just, like it points out, it does generate sort of nonsense out of the blue sometimes.
Thanks, Dr. Thorpe. I mean, that's an area where, right, it presents this really interesting question about what's the standard of care when you're using one of these tools, right? Because the standard of care should be, well, I'm thinking out loud, right? It should be that you're required to review those notes, right? And I mean, we think about, Dr. Bolat, you were referencing lots of the cases that we see in the disciplinary context are about record keeping, right? So in theory, these standards are going to develop, right? As folks start to use these new tools, such that it's not just about keeping records in a particular way, it's about reviewing the notes that have been taken by that AI scribe, right? And making sure that they reflect what actually happened, not just this summary.
Just a follow up on
Yeah.
that. It used to be, the saying was, if it's not documented, it didn't happen, right? But we all know that's not true. There was lots that happened that was never documented. Lots of things happened that the doctor was, in the old days, when I inherited, I bought a practice, and the notes from that guy's practice, a lot of times very complex patients had maybe 4 lines in the note. He knew what he had done, but I couldn't figure it out looking at the note. Today, the problem is not if it isn't documented, it didn't happen. The question is, if it's documented, did it happen? And the truth is, lots of stuff is documented. You can get a 15-page note, and I would doubt that most of that stuff was actually done. It's really, I think it's very troubling that we now have these huge documentations that really don't have any, there's no, if you ask the patient, did this all happen? I'm almost positive that they would, I bet, I can't say, but a lot of what's documented isn't done.
Interesting. All right, I saw Dr. Yip, and then I saw Mr. Watkins also.
Thank you for excellent talk. It actually remind myself and the board and our friends here to, when we do reach out, to remind our next generation of healthcare provider, MDDO, PAMP, see this AI revolution as a way to improve patient communication care, not to replace. As Dr. Thorpe mentioned, we see a lot of copy and paste these days. It's so disgusting. MPPA, even doctors. And we need to remind our next generation doctor, AI is to help. We need to input the idea, not have AI input the idea in us. We rely on the next generation to really participate in this revolution, rather than being taken over by the AI. Thank you.
Thanks, Dr. Yip. Mr. Watkins?
Yes, thank you very much. My question is, because in the medical space, say on the regulatory side, right now, everything is based on the data set and the learning model that we use in order to kind of give us the result. But right now, who's compiling that data? Or do we feed it into a back-end system that we can actually start creating these data sets? I'm sure the data sets are there, sitting in all the boards in big files, and it needs to be exported to into a system where we then generate this learning model. So my question is, I saw you did a complaint intake assistant. I'm very curious as how you did that in terms of the data set that you use, just to give an initial kind of feedback into the system. And was it policies that you use in the learning model to extract the information?
So, so as far as the complaint intake assistant goes, the data set was, I reached out to, well, it was multifaceted because I had to learn the whole process as I went through because I really didn't know what I was doing in the beginning. But throughout all this, I had to learn some Python, some computer language, and some things to figure out, well, what do you mean when you say this? But long story short, the data set was originally, I trolled health grades, and I looked for the worst reviewed doctors, and then I pulled the complaints for them to treat as sample complaints. I then reached out to a couple medical boards to ask for de-identified complaints. I didn't get a lot of responses from there just because Open Records Acts. But then the Federation, we get people who email us either wanting us to, the medical board of so-and-so did this, you need to fix it. And this is my complaint. And they send the entire complaint they said. So I had some of those on file. So I took about 20 complaints and I used them as the starting basis of complaints. And I just used OpenAI's ChatGPT model just to do a basic summarization feature, which is I use personally for work all the time. to the comments about the note-taking apps, I wholeheartedly agree. They're amazing, but they make mistakes all the time. But if you get into the habit and you learn to use them really well, it becomes my entire workflow is no longer, I'm not typing notes anymore. It's all recorded. I transcribe it, I summarize it, I stick it in a database. So, it's all part of that automation. But to the complaint intake, once I had the established complaints, I de-identified all of them just to make sure. The real heavy data set was the statutes. The getting statutes in a format. So I picked places I used to work: Missouri, District of Columbia. I had partners in Ohio that helped with me with one of the projects, and another partner in DC. And then we tried to structure the statutes in many different ways. At first, we gave it the bot the statutes raw. And we said, this is the complaint. Is there anything in this complaint that applies, or anything in these statutes that would apply to this complaint? And just to see what it would do. And it was terrible. The statutes were too long, too convoluted. The way they're written with subpoints and subpoints and sub-subpoints, the model didn't understand the references and the connections. So what the biggest learning experience from that was turn that into natural language. Take all of those, for example, for the complaint intake, I don't need all of California's laws. I need those specific statutes that are the authorizations for discipline. And so I stripped those out, and then I tried to reword them in a way that I thought would be more common language, if you will. And so this is all an example of me trying to use an out-of-the-box model and not doing that fine-tuning on legal or complaint-based knowledge, and just using an out-of-the-box model to see how good it is. And the outputs, and I will tell you, are exactly what I kind of thought, which was that as far as comparing statutes, terrible. I didn't expect it to be that good, but I thought it could at least give me in the neighborhood, but it would always pick the alcohol and abuse statute because it was like this doctor was below the standard of care, therefore he or she must be somehow impaired. And so there was a logic falsehood in there. So then I realized I need to give it better instructions. And so it's an iterative process. Like I can't say like I apologize, I don't remember the board member who named about the comments about the medical notes, but you're absolutely right. If you're just going to go turn it on and then you're not going to do that work, there is work involved in this. But once you get your automation workflow set up, I will say it's quite beautiful. But by no means are any of these, I'd like to take the approach of, I call human in the loop. None of these are ready for human outside the loop. Every single one of these tools requires a human in the loop. And until that changes, from my perspective, the human in the loop is the responsible one. Who that human is, I don't know. But I will say I want to take this as a quick opportunity to also respond to the comment about the EHR issue. I think AI automation bias is a big problem with healthcare and the EHRs and just copying and pasting. And as someone that used to be an attorney for a medical board, I've saw plenty of cases, as I'm sure you have, of that being a problem. So automation bias is a huge problem. My problem with the automation bias in AI, or I should say my concerns, how am I going to know who generated that note, the clinician or the AI? Because I'm pretty sure the documentation is not going to differentiate between the two. And so if it's not going to differentiate between the two, I mean, it goes back to what was said about, if it wasn't documented, it didn't happen. Well, you documented it, so you're the one responsible for that documentation. So I do think there's a lot of education that has to go on to the medical doctors. And I think there are many clinicians that are in practice that'll just straight over the head. And I do think at the graduate medical education levels, really where they need to just nail in the education on this, because the advances in the imaging models, so much more I could have gone in depth in, but the imaging models, that's the forefront of almost all of this. Their ability to their accuracy, because humans are terrible at it. We're just not good at it. And the accuracy level on these diagnostic imaging models are quite impressive. But that's separate and apart from what I like to get. So there's the diagnostic models that, is this a cancerous cell? Is this, do they have sepsis? There was a diagnostic tool. Actually, when we spoke with Duke has a sepsis model that they use to analyze based on the EHR and various data points, and they gave us a quick visualization of it. It's pretty interesting. But Duke freely admitted what works in their system doesn't necessarily work in another hospital system. So it goes back to, you really have to take this thing that's out of the box and make it work for you, fit it for you. And so my big lesson from the complaint intake assistant was that once it gets working, it's really great, but it needs a lot of out-of-the-box tinkering to finesse it. What I did for me wouldn't work for California. It could work. It would have to require fine-tuning, but you really need to know what works in your workflow. That was the other thing I learned from Ohio. Like they wanted to know this complaint that came in and the bot said no big deal. Well, the board wanted to know it because of a history or a political problem that's going on. So there's all of these things that you have to go into and think about when you're creating these systems.
Thank you. Other comments from board members? Dr. Tsai?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Myers. A wonderful presentation. I think with you being an attorney working in the healthcare arena, do you think, now I'm getting your opinion, as President Lawson mentioned, standard of care, do you think that with AI, obviously AI will be able to generate a comprehensive list of differential diagnoses for a given set of symptoms, findings, and whatnot. Do you think that will change what the standard of care is? Because obviously standard of care is a legal term that, you know, what a reasonable physician in similar circumstances would do. Now, would that be a reasonable physician with AI be able to do? Do you think that will change?
Well, I think the main thing to constantly remind yourself when you're talking about AI is that the standard of care applies to the care provided. And so what is the care you're trying to provide? In terms of medical notes, it's accurate medical notes that accurately show what it is. So whether you use AI to achieve that or you don't use AI to achieve that, I don't know that that would affect that standard of care. It may, I don't know. To me, the difference is what if those notes start including, as you pointed out, a differential diagnosis, and at the top of that diagnosis was whatever. And does the standard now mean I'm going to start the care based on that top diagnosis, or am I not? And right now, I don't set the standard, and this is a hypothetical, as my disclosure said. I'm not providing legal or medical advice, but at the top line, I think as long as the clinician is diagnosing, or sorry, documenting that the AI wanted me to proceed on high blood pressure, and it's just completely wrong. I disagree. All of this, as long as the doctor is documenting that, I think that is the standard of care for the documentation component. As far as the care that then gets provided, what were the alternative? What were all of those different scenarios that come in, or those different facts that may have come in that change that? I do think AI will change the standard of care for imaging and diagnostic stuff very, very quickly, if it hasn't already, before it changes the standard of care for actually inpatient. I'm AI Dr. Frank. I'm not a real, you know what I mean? Like as far as what the feds call clinician decision support. I do think the standard of care is not changed. Maybe it will change in the next 2 years, 3 years, 4 years. But right now, I think it's about those diagnostic things. The standards for going against sepsis detection, the standard for saying no, this isn't a colonoscopy, whatever. I think those are the things that will see the immediate impact. And I think though that those things are actually more identifiable and addressable by medical boards versus those things that are subtle and hidden. I think automation bias I no reason to believe this is purely anecdotal, but I do believe documentation and automation bias will be the biggest problem boards face with AI in the beginning. I do think people in small clinic settings will implement an out-of-the-box model that they got real cheap, or that somebody tried to set up for them, and it'll be a one and done, and that they don't update as time goes on, and they'll just end up doing really bad documentation. It may make their work better for them, but maybe their work wasn't so much better or that great to begin with. So I do worry about how it will implement that. But I also think it's a phenomenal tool. I've had plenty of people that English isn't their first language that come up to me and like, how could I use this with my patients so that I could have a better interaction and make sure I really do get better notes? And I'm like, that's great, but you need to proof these, you need to review these, and you need to make sure they're accurate. And if your English isn't good enough to do that in the beginning, think about that. Think about those things. So those are kind of that was a long-winded answer to your question.
Thank you. Are there other comments before I go to the public? All right, let's ask for just traditional public comments. Any commenters in the room? All right, Sean, if you could open up the WebEx line.
Yes, if anyone would like to make a public comment, you can use the hand raising feature or the Q&A window. Just type in anything in there. You don't have to type in your full question. And if you're in a call-in only line, you can press *3. First up, we had queued up from the beginning of the meeting here, Black Patients Matter. You should be receiving that prompt on your end now.
Yes, hello, thank you. I appreciate the information presented here about the AI technology and its utilization in healthcare setting and such. But we would be very concerned about addressing the importance of something we see in psychiatry, that being spirituality. And in fact, whatever the spiritual belief of a patient is not to be discarded. It's very important in terms of addressing things such as anxiety, hope, medication compliance. I mean, just a very large realm. And we're all along those lines. It is concerning that the medical board does not have representation for women of a minority setting, those who are Muslim. We're very concerned that the AI technology that you're addressing and the fascination with it and the algorithm and its usefulness will actually be discriminatory towards those who are spiritual, those who are followers of the Prophet Muhammad and the Quran. That is very, very important to include, to correspond with, to document, to follow. And so, you know, looking at the medical board now, not having any Muslim women present is just speaking to the fact that it's not important, and we're concerned that that lack of importance will be shown also in this AI technology. Thank you.
Thank you for your public comment. Next up here, we have Paloma Cerna. Should be receiving a prompt on your end.
I'm the mother of Elisa Cerna, who died in the Las Colinas jail in San Diego County on November 11, 2019. And so I'm sorry, you know, I'm not a doctor or a nurse, you know. I was sitting in because I did read and a finding how one of the doctors in my daughter's case, her license was revoked. And so I happened to log in where the presentation regarding the AI on the SOAP notes. And I know this meeting does not pertain to nurses, but my concern with the AI is how would we know that that the doctors would be really paying attention about the documentation, because I noticed in my daughter's case, nurses and doctors, they weren't like what was stated earlier, what was not documented did not happen. My daughter was neglected with medical care. She died of alcohol withdrawal. In 5 days in custody, she died. And so a lot of her in the criminal trial, it was noted that the SOAP notes, hardly anything was documented. And so my fear is nurses and doctors relying on AI, and like what was stated earlier too, was that they don't go back and make sure what was put in was true, because my daughter's SOAP note, there was pretty much nothing there. They never noted that she was vomiting for 5 days, that she was in pain, that she was having seizures because of the withdrawal. So my fear is also to them, the doctor and nurses, relying on AI to put in this great documentation of an individual's health or patient's health, and it's not true. And luckily, we had video evidence show otherwise. What was documented on the SOAP note, it contradicted what the video evidence shown. So I don't know if there will be a way where these AI soap notes, it would make sure the doctors are confirming that, yes, this is what's happening to the patient, and that they do get, take, this technology as, take advantage of it and let it help them to treat their patient. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your public comment. This time I don't see any additional requests.
Okay, thank you, Sean. We'll bring it back to the room here. Any last minute public commenters? Any further comments from the board members? Just a final thought for me. This is an area where I think we, because we're the California Medical Board, because we're situated here in California where many of these companies, whether it be Google or OpenAI or Anthropic, are leading the way. It was fascinating for me to hear about these various medical applications that you mentioned Google was working on. I just think this is a real opportunity for us to lead in this space. And it is, as the conversation has transpired, just been thinking about this medical record issue, right? And whether or not there's an opportunity for us to, put together a white paper or issue some guidance or start to have some thought leadership as the medical board on what should be included, not from a regulatory perspective, not from let's legislate on this, but just whether there's a way for us to lead here and start to point providers in the right direction. Anyway, something for us to think about, something for our staff to think about how we might best be of help in this space, because I do think it's an area that's going to evolve. I took note also of what Mr. Myers said about, I guess, the imaging tools, right? That's an area that's going to evolve, already has evolved with real urgency and immediacy, right? Where the standard of care is changing literally overnight, right? In terms of what tools should be used. So again, something for us to think about. So Mr. Myers, thank you so much for joining us for this presentation. We really appreciate it. We look forward to collaborating with you and FSMB more as things evolve here. All right.
Thank you. This is a pleasure. You guys have a great meeting.
Thank you. Okay, we are moving right along again. We're moving along to agenda item 14, which is officer elections. Just some context, because we seem to have officer elections frequently. So we had some officer elections at our last board meeting. Of course, that was to fill a vacancy. Of course, the terms by which we are all appointed to the board don't necessarily align with the requirements in the medical board's administrative procedure manual, which calls for elections during the first meeting of the fiscal year. So as you know, the state of California's fiscal year ends June 30. So this is our first meeting of the fiscal year. We actually do have a vacancy also to fill. So in any event, we need to hold elections again, notwithstanding that we held some elections at the last meeting. So I think I will go ahead. I'll call for any nominations. We need to fill, well, the nominations need to cover president, vice president, and secretary of the board. They can be made as a slate. They can be made as two of those at one time. They can be made individually. So I will open the floor for nominations.
And president, I'd like to.
Okay,
make
I
a
have Dr.
nomination. Yes. Okay. I want to enthusiastically recommend to our board the following slate: for president of our board, Christina Lawson, and our vice president for the board, Dr. Helzer.
Okay, thank you. There is one more office, so if someone could add one now, or we can do that separately. It sounds like Dr. Bullat wants to do president, vice president to start. We have a second for that motion. Are there any other nominations? Okay, seeing none, I think we need to do this public comment, right? Okay, so we need to, any comments from the board? Let's open that up for public comment. Anyone in the room? I'm sorry? Oh, Dr. Bullock, can you turn off your mic? Any comment from the room? Any comments from WebEx on the nominations of Dr. Helzer for vice president and me for president?
If you'd like to make a public comment, we'll give you a few seconds to queue up by either raising your hand or typing something into the Q&A window. Anyone on a call-in line only, you can press *3. This time I'm not seeing any requests.
Okay, great. Thanks, Sean. We'll bring that back to the board. If there are no further comments, let's have Ms. Struther please call the roll.
Dr. Ayala Rodriguez,
Yes.
Dr. Balat,
Yes.
Ms. Chung, Dr. Helzer,
Yes.
Dr. Thorpe,
Yes.
Ms. Torres,
Yes.
Dr. Sy,
Yes.
Mr. Watkins, Dr. Yip,
Yes.
Ms. Lawson.
Yes. All right. Thank you all for your confidence. I look forward to working with you very closely. You're about to find out how many meetings you need to attend now. Dr. Helzer. We'll ease you into it. It's not a sunset year. All right. Nominations for secretary. I'd actually like to make one first. I'd like to nominate Dr. Balat as secretary. Are there other nominations?
I'll second Dr. Balat's nomination.
Motion.
All right. That's terrific. Any other nominations? All right. Any public comments? Any comments on WebEx?
If you'd like to make a public comment, please use the hand raising feature or the Q&A window, or press *3 if you're on a call-in only line. First up here, we have Black Patients Matter. Should be receiving that prompt right now.
Yes, hello. So we just have a concern that there is not full representation on the board. Muslim women have rights too, and so we would like to see that representation present. Thank you.
Thank you for your public comment. At this time, President Lawson, I don't see any additional requests.
Thanks, John. All right, we'll bring it back to the board. And Ms. Struther, if you could please call the roll.
Dr. Ayala Rodriguez,
Yes.
Dr. Balat,
Yes.
Ms. Chung, Dr. Helzer,
Yes.
Dr. Thorpe,
Yes.
Ms. Torres,
Yes.
Dr. Sy,
Yes.
Mr. Watkins, Dr. Yip,
Yes.
Ms. Lawson.
Yes. Thank you. Congratulations to Dr. Balat. We look forward to working with you as well. Okay, now really for my favorite agenda item. Agenda item 15, future agenda items. For the new board members, this is the time when we present ideas for things we'd like to hear talked about, things like the AI presentation. Those are things that come out of this agenda item. We also hear from the public about things they'd like us to focus on in future meetings. It doesn't mean all of the topics that are presented as ideas necessarily will come forward at a future meeting, but from an agenda perspective, our staff take those back. They look at opportunities to develop them, think about what the overall strategic plan, et cetera, for the board is for the year, and then we try to integrate those ideas. So that's what this agenda item is all about. So do any board members have suggestions for future agenda items? Okay, we've got a couple. Dr. Yip and then Mr. Watkins.
I'm not sure this is the time to bring up. Yesterday we mentioned about the renewal license questionnaire. Is it something agenda or just the staff to work on?
Yeah.
I think it's fine to raise it at this time. Are you talking about including a question on impairment on renewals or something else?
Or does it need to be updated when renewal license, such as the questionnaires? That was one of the issues brought up.
Yeah, I think the need to. Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
We can talk about that. So I think that's something we can talk about maybe as part of one of the general updates too.
Yeah.
So. Yeah.
And the second, I'm not sure it is a gen item or it's just a work item that create a approved slide set or presentation set that the member or the staff go to reach out to schools and organization. What do we present? What message? Medical record, AI, how do you prevent you from being disciplined, etc. So I'm not sure we need to discuss agenda approve or just say staff working on it.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, Mr. Watkins.
Yes, I would like a discussion maybe before our next legislative cycle about a full board discussion on the notice to the public on doctors that are currently under investigation. And my reason for asking is that this is the single biggest thing that keeps coming up in emails on concerns from folks that write to me on my various social media spaces. Thank you.
Thank you. Additional, Dr. Blatt?
Just following up on the excellent presentation we had on AI, I think to your point, President Lawson, that if we're going to be leaders, we have to understand ourselves around this table. And is there an opportunity for someone in the industry that talks about, because, you know, I always say it when I'm doing anything with data, scrub your data first and understand it. And if you don't know that, then you're off to a bad start. And I think the point that was made is, let's talk about those data sets. And I think the other thing that Mr. Watkins mentioned, I mean, about a little bit step back, even in our complainant unit, that when people come in and want to ask, you know, there's data out there from health plans, from grievances, complaints, and so on. Can we be that leader? Can we look at partnering as a state agency, right? So I'm thinking about who could we get that could help break it down a little bit more, because what we had was a very high level presentation, excellent presentation, but now it's about understanding. And I think we have to understand.
Thanks, Dr. Blatt. Other future agenda items from board members? Any from members of the public in the room? Sean, how about on the WebEx?
If you'd like to make a public comment, please use the hand raising feature of the Q&A window. If you're in a call-in only line, you can press *3. First up here, we have Black Patients Matter.
Yes, thank you again for giving me a voice. AI technology, of course, is here and it's being utilized in many different fields. It could be of benefit as well when selecting which physicians to investigate. So certainly, as we can see from the list, there is a concern that the medical board or enforcement are choosing physicians with a Muslim last name. It's just a concern that's out there. And so certainly with AI technology, this could be justified or not. And so AI technology would be also beneficial when selecting which physicians to investigate, which cases to pursue, which cases to revoke. Because sometimes, it's known that there are concerns that physicians, minority physicians, Muslim physicians are being targeted unfairly, especially women physicians. And again, we voice the concern that there is no presence of Muslim women on the medical board. Certainly, we respect and we honor the Muslim male physicians, but women have a voice, they have a presence, and we are concerned that the medical board does not want to see anyone wearing a hijab on the medical board. Thank you.
Thank you for your public comment. At this time, I don't see any additional requests.
Okay, we will bring it back to the board again. Our next item is adjournment. I hope the new board members don't get used to our quick meetings. They're not always this quick, but I want to thank you all for participating in our August board meeting. We're thrilled to have the new members on board, so we look forward to working with each of you in the coming months. Just a reminder, two things. First, if you're interested in digging in and getting more involved in the Physician Health and Wellness Program, send me an email. We're going to have some various activities to work on before our next board meeting. I've already heard from a couple of you. And then the board's next quarterly board meeting is November 21st through 22nd of this year. So there being no further business, the meeting is officially adjourned. Hope you all have a great weekend.